Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you tonight from Ra'anana, right outside of Tel Aviv, done with my 3 month comedy and book tour in the US, and now back in the Holy Land. Tonight's episode is called Double Fault, and it is the week of January 15th, 2025. And before I get to the explanation for the title Double Fault, what exactly that means, the story behind it, a little bit of front matter. First of all, an apology. My weekly newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, typically goes out on Thursdays. It did not go out this week, and I wish I had some great technical reason for why it didn't happen. The truth is, I forgot to push the schedule button. I had it all saved, had it all written, but alas, it was not able to be saved. So it did not go out. Sorry about that. Many of you wrote to me today asking for the link for tonight's episode, and I did send it today in a separate mail, but sorry for the delay. Second of all, if the audio sounds a bit different tonight, it's because my regular microphone did not arrive. I flew back from the US on Thursday, arriving on Friday, and my two pieces of luggage did not arrive along with me. They were, I don't know, lost by El Al or did not make it onto the El Al flight. So I'm using a backup mic that I keep here at home. But I do want to tell you a little bit about that journey because I think my flights from the US actually can offer some insights into what Israelis are thinking about and what we're going through right now. The routing I had was it's one you're all familiar with, the typical Fort Lauderdale to Boston to Madrid to Tel Aviv route, a total of 26 hours on various airlines. The last airline, the Madrid to Tel Aviv flight, that was El Al. And the reason for this routing is because it is literally impossible right now to get a direct ticket from New York to Tel Aviv. The only airline flying is El Al. I've talked to you about that before, the way El Al now has literally a monopoly of all flights coming into and out of Israel internationally. And what they've done, aside from having not enough seats available, what they've done with the remaining seats is they have hiked the prices up 3, 4 times normal. Their profits compared to last year are up about 150%. And the tickets I was seeing to fly from New York to Tel Aviv were somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 range, which is absurd. And so I ended up doing this very strange routing, going from South Florida to Boston to Madrid, and then switching to El Al. So what a lot of Israelis are doing right now is they're finding other airlines to get them to an El Al city where the flights are cheaper, and then taking El Al for the final flight into Israel. Or if you're going out of Israel, you'll fly from Tel Aviv to Larnaca or Athens or Madrid, London, and then catch a flight to wherever else you're going. But Israelis are very upset about this. We're upset about the fact that we, the civilians, have been giving so much to the country, whether it's serving in the military, in the reserve, sending our kids to the army, really doing whatever our country has asked for us. And when we do need to take a trip, whether for business or a small vacation, El Al turns around and thanks us by jacking up the prices. So a little bit of an Israeli story right there. And by the way, I mentioned this before. I have a friend who had to fly from the U.S. recently. He was in New York, but he flew to Los Angeles because the only normal El Al flight he could get was flying from New York to L.A. and then L.A. to Tel Aviv. We're doing whatever it takes to get back into the country. This same friend, by the way, he works for a nonprofit here in Israel that brings students over from North America. And he's had, for a while now, he's had 30 tickets to bring North American teens to the US. This was back in August that he had 30 tickets to bring them over. And El Al called him in July offering to buy back those 30 tickets. Why? Because they knew they could resell them at triple the price. So there you go. That's El Al for you. But anyway, if the audio does sound different, that is why. Another element of this story is that, both of my bags were not loaded onto the plane from Madrid to Tel Aviv. This was Friday afternoon, around 2 in the afternoon when I landed in Tel Aviv. And so, you do what you do when your bags don't arrive. I went to the El Al claim desk, and they told me that I actually couldn't file a claim because it was too late in the day on Friday and their entire computer system was already closed for Shabbat, the Sabbath. And I had this moment where I thought, on the one hand, sometimes it's so wonderful to live in a Jewish country, and it's very special to have an entire country celebrating Shabbat, and a siren goes off a few minutes before the Sabbath comes in on Friday afternoons. Um, Jewish holidays are national holidays. That can be very special. But sometimes living in a Jewish country is a real pain in the ass, and I experienced that on Friday when I wanted to file a claim for my lost luggage, and the entire computer system was down. So I had to just give my phone number on a piece of paper, which the clerk promised to enter into the system Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, when the system opened up, assuring me that my luggage would arrive on the Sunday flight from Madrid, landing at 5 p.m., and ultimately to my apartment on Monday or Tuesday, at the latest Wednesday. And no, we don't receive any compensation from El Al for this. If you're a tourist, you might, but since I live here, just gotta live with it. In any case, that's my little El Al story to start out this week's episode. I also want to share a few thoughts on what it's like to be back in Israel right now. Um, I was 3 months in the United States for this book and comedy tour. That's a really long time, especially with everything going on right now in Israel. It feels a lot longer. I think the main thing I've noticed being back here in Israel is that once you're here, there really is no way to escape the reality of what is going on. When I'm in the US, I can sometimes detox and take a day or two away from the news. And there were a few days like that. There were a few days where I simply said, you know what, it's too much. It's making me a nervous wreck. I am not going to check wherever I check. Times of Israel, J Post. Sometimes I would watch N12, the television news over the internet. And there were a few days where I just took a break from that and decided, I need a little hafsaka, a little recess. And I could do other things, and life would go on in the US. I think you're able to put up that boundary and sort of take a break. But what I've noticed is that when you're here in Israel, you cannot do that. Uh, the news is everywhere. From the moment I landed, it hit me smack in the face. Those of you who've been to Israel since October 7th of 23, you know what the airport is like right now. When you come off your plane, you put your passport down on the machine and get that little tag that allows you to go through customs. And then immediately there's, I want to say, beautiful might not be the right word, but it's a very artistic dog tag display. I think it's the same number of dog tags as there are hostages in Gaza. And it really is very thoughtful and aesthetic dog tags of different sizes hanging from the ceiling. It's a real work of art, and you can't miss it when you exit your plane and walk into the main terminal building. So that's the first thing that hits you when you enter Ben Gurion Airport from overseas. And then immediately, as you go down that either ramp or sort of slanted walkway down to the baggage claim, if you've been here, you know that there are posters of all the hostages lining that rampway down. And I happened to fly very soon after October 7th. And I remember when those posters were there and they were mostly just the photos and the names of the hostages. But now those posters are covered with blessings and well wishes and stickers and drawings, and mostly little writings of love, and in both English, Hebrew, and other languages to the hostages. It's one way we've seen the evolution of this crisis. But again, you can't avoid the news. As soon as you walk into, before you've reached baggage claim, you're already hit with two very powerful reminders that we still have 101 hostages in Gaza. There's no way to put your head in the sand and take a break, really, from the moment you arrive. And then, of course, then once you leave the airport, There are billboards calling attention to the plight of the hostages. There are hostage posters all around, certainly the town I live in, Ra'anana, but other towns as well. In our apartment building, our neighbor's son had been serving in Gaza for a long time, and I found out that has since gotten out. He was in combat engineers, which is a very heavy duty unit. They're the ones responsible for blowing up the tunnels. But that was a very personal connection we had, knowing that our downstairs neighbor literally was not sleeping at night because her son was in Gaza all that time. And any media you put on here for even a moment, it's in your face, whether it's the plight of the hostages or the latest IDF soldier who, God forbid, has been killed. We are now over 400 soldiers killed. So if you wanted to avoid the news here in Israel, you would have no choice but to literally shut yourself up in a room and close the windows and doors, turn off your computer, your phone, and completely disconnect from the outside world, which takes a lot of effort and is pretty much impossible to do. And I must also say, I have much less desire when I'm here to cut off from the news. On the one hand, being here, I feel like, hey, this is my country and I want to know what's going on. This isn't just some far off story that I want to catch up on the latest dish, but it's affecting me. It's our story and I want to know what's happening. And part of it is very practical, that I want to stay in touch with the news to know if I'll be headed to the bomb shelter tonight. A couple days ago, there were a lot of warnings the day after I arrived about having our bomb shelters ready because we were expecting a big attack from the Houthis in retaliation for Israeli actions taken against them in Yemen. And that attack, thank God, didn't happen. That doesn't mean it still won't, and that we're in the clear. But the news here plays that role as well. It's keeping you up to date the same way you might listen to the news in the US for the latest info on the biggest winter storm. Here, we're following the news because our safety hangs in the balance. So, in the weeks ahead, I'm definitely going to keep you posted on what life in Israel is like and what we're talking about and thinking here now that I've returned. All right, on to this week's episode. It is called Double Fault. And it's based on a small news item, which I don't even know if it made the press in the US. I doubt it did. But here it's kind of I wouldn't say a big deal, but certainly something we're talking about. It's about the women's tennis player Lina Glushko. She is Israel's #1 WTA women's tennis player. And she's been playing at the Australian Open. And I don't know Lina personally, but I'm a big tennis fan, and I play tennis quite often myself. Some of you might know that of my 4 books, one of them is about tennis. Three are related to Israel, and one of them is about my other love, tennis. It's called Essential Tennis. So I know the game pretty well. I've seen Lina play here in Ra'anana. Most of the big tournaments in Israel happen at the courts near my house, at the Ra'anana Tennis Center in Leva Park. And so I've seen her up close in the big tournaments here in Israel. She has a wicked forehand, a really good first serve as well. She's also a real patriot, and this relates to her story at the Australian Open. She did not qualify for the main draw, so she had to play what's called the qualies, the qualifying round, that if she won that qualifying round, she then could be in the main draw of the Australian Open. She's ranked, I believe, 207th in the world. She was going into the Open last week. And she wanted to wear a yellow hostage pin on her, on her jumpsuit, on her top before taking the court. And she was not allowed. The tournament officials at the Australian Open forbade her. She was not allowed to wear that yellow hostage pin on her tennis outfit. And this made the news here in Israel because of the signal it sends. A yellow hostage pin. All it's saying is that we need to remember that there are 101 civilians being held hostage by jihadist terrorists in Gaza. That's all it's saying. That hostage pin does not mean that Israel wants to resettle Gaza. It doesn't mean that we want to use certain types of munitions and bombs against Hamas that could cause collateral damage against the Gazan people. It doesn't say anything about borders or ports or human aid. humanitarian aid. All it means is that we should remember that there are hostages being held against their will in Gaza for over 450 days now. And you've got to ask, what kind of world are we living in where wearing a pin that reminds us of human bondage, of humans being held in cages underground in Gaza, where that is not allowed, where that is seen as a quote political statement? That was the reason that the Australian Open officials gave for not allowing Lina to wear that pin, that it was a political statement akin to waving a Palestinian flag in the stands. And it's really, really sad that we have come to that. And we need to ask, what does it mean? I mean, can you think of another country in the world where if that person's fellow countrymen were being held hostage, they would not be allowed to wear a small reminder of that, those hostages being held? I should remind all of you that players from from Russia right now, players from Russia who are playing in the US Open, the Australian Open, when they list their name on the television screen or on the grandstand screen, there is no Russian flag next to their name. So clearly, tennis tournament officials are willing to take sides. They are willing to say that in that battle, Ukraine are the good guys and Russia are the bad guys, but they still allow the Russians to play. They just don't have that flag next to their name. But here, in the case of Gaza, Hamas, and Israel, tournament officials are unwilling to say that Hamas, who broke the ceasefire on October 7th, that had been in existence, they're unwilling to say that they are the bad guys. They're unwilling to say that those who murdered 1,200 Israelis and who kidnapped over 200, with 101 now remaining, that they're the bad guys. Instead, it's a political statement. To me, this is a Jewish thing. There's no way around it. It's an Israel thing. It's a Jewish thing. There is no other country in the world for whom this kind of statement would not be allowed. And my very first thought was that this means we have lost the PR war. But I actually don't think that we ever had a chance, to tell you the truth. You can only lose the PR battle if there was any hope at all that you might have won it at some point. And quite frankly, I don't think we ever had a chance to win the PR battle. Tom Friedman, the New York Times columnist, right after October 7th, he said that Israel should have called our war in Gaza Operation Bring Home Our Grandmothers. The idea being that we needed to remind the world why we were going into Gaza, that it was not to take territory or destroy buildings. It was to rescue our grandmothers, our daughters, our sons, our mothers and fathers, our children. And I used to believe that he was right, that maybe it would have made a difference if we had named it Operation Bring Home Our Grandmothers or something like that. But to be honest with you, I no longer think that's the case. I don't think it matters what we would have named that operation. I don't think it matters what kind of PR we would have done or what kind of videos we would have posted. We didn't have a chance in the PR war. This is years and years in the making. As we all remember, the protests against Israel began before Israel even began bombing Gaza. On October 8th, there were already people protesting Israel around the world. And this wasn't really protesting, it was more like celebrating what Hamas has done and justifying it with their celebrations. So in other words, this was not some sort of rational calculus people were making based on who they thought were the good guys and the bad guys and what evidence had been presented to them. This was simply hatred for Israel and Jews that was finally allowed to be expressed and unleashed. And that's why I conclude that we really never even had a chance to win this PR battle. And I doubt anything could have been done. I doubt anything could have been done to change the fact that Lina Glushko was not allowed to wear her yellow hostage pin on court at the Australian Open. And this leads me to an idea that I shared with you last week as well, that we really need to stop caring about these protesters. We are simply adding fuel to the fire when we comment on them and talk about them. I really believe that they are the fringe, the ones on these college campuses, the ones on Students for Justice in Palestine. I don't think that most Americans agree with them. I think the last elections showed us that here in the US, there in the US. And I think the more we have incidents like the terrorist attack in New Orleans 2 weeks ago, the more the silent majority of the world is actually against what they see as radical Islam and their jihadist actions. And as I said last week, there's only two things that matter when it comes to world opinion about Israel. Number one, that we continue to get funding from the US so that we can have the defense we need against our enemies. And number two, that Israelis are safe all over the world whenever they travel. There have been a few incidents, specifically, the number right now is 12 incidents of former Israeli soldiers traveling around the world on their trips after the army who had to be snuck out of the countries they were in because of suspicion that those local governments were going to try to arrest them for war crimes committed in Gaza. And Israel is now taking steps. Since I broke that news to you last week, Israel is taking steps to mitigate that and prevent that from happening in the future. And it's steps that we're taking on our side. From now on, in the Israeli media, all soldiers, any photographs of soldiers or television footage of soldiers in Gaza must be from behind, so you can't see their face. Or if you do see their face is blurred out in the TV image or the photograph. This is so that Israel haters around the world cannot use these images of their faces and cross verify who these soldiers are and find their social media accounts and then start posting about them and calling for their arrest. So this is a change that Israel has made. It's also now made it clear to all soldiers in Gaza that they are not allowed to take photographs. They are certainly not allowed to post anything on social media. It was actually quite a phenomenon during this entire war in Gaza that soldiers were in Gaza taking photos where you could see their faces, making even not just videos, but making funny videos about their experiences in Gaza. Not funny to the rest of the world, but funny to Israelis who needed to break the tension and also to be reminded that our sons and daughters in Gaza were okay. But that is no longer allowed. The IDF has made clear: do not photograph yourselves, do not upload any videos or pictures. And the soldiers know that it's serious because they know that their post-army trips could be in jeopardy because they could be wanted for war crimes too if they go to one of these countries. So that's a change that Israel is making, and that is where we need to make the change. Personally, am I concerned about this idea of Israelis being arrested around the world for war crimes? I'm concerned about it, but I don't think it's going to last. I think it's a fad. I see it as a trend. I think eventually these countries, if Israelis don't come, they would see their tourism dry up. Certainly countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, South America. A lot of Israelis go there after the army, spend a lot of money, and it would kill an entire industry to no longer have them come. And I think, frankly, a lot of these countries are mostly just afraid of their own Muslim populations and are trying to appease them. And I also think that soon enough, I mentioned this last week as well, that soon enough, many countries around the world are going to experience what Israel has been experiencing. We already saw it in New Orleans. We saw recent examples in Germany, a couple examples in Germany. We saw right now synagogues being defaced in Australia. And I'm pretty sure that most Australians, the silent majority of Australians, are upset about these synagogue vandalizations, and they are not happy about what extreme Islamist Muslims are doing in their own country. You might not hear about them. They might not make as much noise as the anti-Israel protesters, but I do think that most people in these countries are more concerned about their growing Muslim populations and what it is going to mean for their own countries. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the most popular name in England in 2023 was Mohammed, and I think the Brits are concerned about what that could mean for the future of their own country. As for Lina Glushko and her pin, she was not allowed to wear it on the court, but she did find a way around it. She took a yellow ribbon and tied it in her hair, making a ponytail, and the yellow ribbon was shaped in exactly the same loopy manner as the hostage pin. So she did go out on court with a yellow ribbon in her hair to commemorate the hostages, and they did allow her to wear that. Ultimately, on the tennis side of things, Lina did lose her match to Leolia Jeanjean of France. She won the first set 6-1, but then went down 6-2, 6-1. And next week on Inside Israel, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the ins and outs of Israeli tennis in particular, but Israeli sports in general, and why it's so hard for Israeli athletes to win championships on the global level. The reason I'll be doing this is because the one piece of feedback I've gotten from people about Inside Israel is people saying, we want to hear more about daily life. We're interested in the conflict and everything happening in Gaza and Lebanon and Iran, but we also want to hear about day-to-day life in Israel and show us some insights into Israeli life that we won't hear anywhere else. And so next week's episode, we're going to dedicate to the sporting life, the sporting news, and what Israeli athletes face when they go out and compete on the world stage. A couple of news items. So right now, supposedly, in terms of hostage talks, we are closer than ever to a deal. How close are we? We are supposedly so close that our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, is consulting with Bezalel Smotrich, his finance minister, his very right-wing finance minister, to sort of take the temperature and find out what are right-wing members of the coalition going to say if Bibi signs a hostage deal. Now, to me, this signals two things. It signals, first of all, that we are genuinely close to some sort of hostage deal, at least supposedly, because Bibi would not start taking the temperature of cabinet ministers unless he really thought that a deal might be imminent. But the other thing it shows is just how political an issue this is for Netanyahu. The fact that he has to go to a minister and ask, what do other ministers think? Who will stay? When I say think, what I really mean is who is going to stay in the coalition and who is going to leave the coalition if I sign a hostage deal. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the right-wing minister of the police, has already said he would leave the coalition if Bibi signs a hostage deal. And so right now, Netanyahu, he's frightened that if he signs a hostage deal, if more and more and enough ministers leave the government, his government would fall and he would no longer be prime minister. So I know we don't want to believe that hostages are a political issue, but the truth is they are, and that's what Bibi is doing right now. He's trying to assess whether his government would actually be able to stay together if he were to sign a hostage deal. And I'm pretty sure that if he found out the government would fall if he were to sign it, he wouldn't be signing